Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It is Earth Day, April 22nd. I am Doug Padgett in Minneapolis, sitting here with Patrick Carolan. Patrick is a number of things in this world, including the Catholic Outreach Organizer for Vote Common Good and the co-founder of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And we are super glad that you're with us. We've had some technical difficulties the last couple of days. Maybe it's because we're getting so fancy with our overlays and underlays, but we think we've got this figured out. So sorry about the delayed start for those of you that set your clock to all the times when the Common Good Podcast from Vote Common Good comes your way. Good to see you, Patrick. I am here in Minneapolis. I know you are in Maryland, and my friend, it is Earth Day.
It's good to be here, Doug. Always good to be with you and to celebrate Earth Day.
I put on green today because it's Earth Day and went matchy-matchy with my hat and shirt. And with the more frequent viewers, they will say, well, that's exactly the same outfit you wore yesterday. And that's just a sign of a middle-aged man living in the pandemic. But today, the green is on purpose. The green means something that I want to talk about the planet. You know, on the Vote Common Good podcast here, we like you to consider what's happening in the world, to open your eyes, see what's going on, and then find out how you can engage in it, to let your own little light shine in ways that bring about some goodness. And on Thursdays, we talk about issues that matter. And because today, April 22nd, is the day that the country has decided, the world has decided to celebrate the Earth, give it its own day. Thank you, Mother Earth. This is the day. And Patrick, we as a civilization have been paying attention to Earth Day since 1970, and there are people who till this very moment would hear about Earth Day and say to themselves, oh, I didn't even know there was an Earth Day. And if I did know there was one, I didn't know that it was April 22nd. So what is your history with Earth Day? What's been your background with it?
Well, I was around when the first Earth Day came. In 1970, I was a junior in high school. And I remember back then, I remember what the environmental movement was sort of just starting out. In fact, there was a lot of talk about air pollution, water pollution, things like that. And I remember watching TV, and they'd have these TV commercials. This is up in Connecticut, so it's probably a New York station. And they'd have TV commercials urging women not to shake out their blankets off the balconies, because that was promoting air pollution. And in fact, they even said they passed a law saying it was against the law to do that, and that if the police came by and saw you shaking your blankets out, you were going to be fined for doing that. So that's what the view of climate, environmental justice was back then, was women shaking out blankets off the balconies of their apartments. I was involved in an Earth Day program at my high school, helping to organize back then, and it was mostly centered around picking up garbage, and we cleaned up the school and picked up any trash around the school, and really tried to urge people not to throw their trash. It really was focused on that a lot. So we've come a long way since then. We've done a lot of really good things, both with Earth Day and with understanding of what our ecological environmental problems are. But we haven't gone far enough. We've looked at our problems as simply problems that are technological, problems due to the industrialization. And just shortly before Earth Day, there was a man named Lynn White in 1967, and he gave a lecture on the environmental crisis. And what he said in his lecture was that it's not just a result of technological advances. It's not as simple as saying we're having too many cars and factories. He said that our ecological problem is fundamentally a theological problem or an ideological problem. It's a question of how we see ourselves in relation to God. He said that the Christian arrogance toward nature, as to quote him, bears a huge burden of guilt for the contemporary environmental crisis. So it's great that we're doing these things, and we do need to take time to celebrate the successes that we have. And we have had a lot of successes. Rivers are much less polluted now. We're more conscious of garbage and throwing garbage away. We do a lot of recycling. So we've had that. But if we're going to really move forward, we have to look at it from the theological and ideological perspective as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that was not talked about back in 1970 was the phrasing we now use, which is climate change, or what was to sometimes referred to as global warming, both of which I think are accurate descriptions of what's going on. There were other issues that were afoot, and I think we should take great confidence that as a world and even as a country for the United States, that we have addressed these issues, right? That the Clean Water Act did an awful lot to keep things out of our water that shouldn't be in the water. I remember back in the maybe 70s or 80s, this story, this vivid image in my mind of a river burning, maybe in Ohio or something, the Cuyahoga. Yeah. Like the water was burning because there was so much petroleum on top of it. And the Keep America Clean program that as a kid, Smokey the Bear, sort of out telling you to clean up, and that commercial, people start pollution, people can stop pollution. Like literally just don't throw stuff out your car windows was a movement. And we tend not to do that. We still find stuff by the side of the highways. And, people started adopting highways and going out and picking them up. A lot of that stuff blows out accidentally as opposed to sort of intentionally, which I remember as a kid. Like we'd go to Dairy Queen and we'd throw stuff, just kind of throw it on the ground. Like it's hard to imagine now, that 50 years ago, someone would just throw things on the ground. But there was a cavalier nature to pollution. And we've solved that, and like you say, recycling, obviously a big deal. I get into the sanitation stuff. I really nerd out on this. It's this little hobby I like. And Minneapolis, where I live, has this incinerator that takes care of all the garbage. It's not the full plasma ones, which are really cool, where it changes the molecular structure, but it's similar to that. So all the energy that comes out of this power plant that gets rid of all the garbage that comes into it doesn't go into landfills. It's transferred into power, and then that power lights the sports stadiums that the city is on the hook for, and a bunch of houses around. So we figured out some answers to things. In the 1970s, smog in LA was an enormous issue. Like you couldn't see the sky. It's not that way anymore. People that are in LA watching this can look outside and know that's the case. We don't worry about the ozone layer having a hole burned in it any longer. Lead in our water, and lead in the air, and lead in our paint, and lead in our gasoline. We've solved the lead problem. Extinction has come a long way in this country, with bald eagles and wolves, and like we've done all these really great things. We should take all of that as an encouragement that we can do this stuff, right? You can change your car. Do you remember when gasoline went from leaded gasoline to unleaded gasoline? Do you remember that whole thing? I mean, you're
very controversial too. People were not wanting to do that.
Yeah, people were like, I've got a leaded car. What am I going to do? And then they made different sized gas tank heads, so that you wouldn't accident. I remember as a 16-year-old, this would have been, I don't know, 1982, early 80s, that you had to be careful which leaded or unleaded gas you put in your car. And we don't do that anymore because the country said, and car manufacturers and the government said, you can't make engines that burn leaded gas anymore. We're just not doing it. We're going to reach a point where we say you can't drive cars that burn gas anymore. So anyway, I just think on Earth Day, it's sort of like someone's birthday or an anniversary. You look back and you say to yourself, how have we done? Well, on some of these things, we should get a little checkbox. Good for us. And then let that propel us, forward. You have an interesting story that we were talking about, an hour and a half, 2 hours ago when we tried to first get this podcast started, that you were saying that sometimes in the environmental movement, and it's true in a lot of the activist movements for all of us who are activists, that sometimes we don't take our successes and joys very well. You mind retelling that story? Because I think that's a really
and again, this was back in the early 70s, and Pete Seeger had started a whole movement around cleaning up the Hudson River. And he would have this festival every year. I was probably 19 or 20 years old. And so one weekend when the festival was happening, and I decided I was going to go and hang out there. And I was being very environmentally conscious at that point in time. So I hitchhiked from Connecticut to where we had the festival. And, all these groups were out there. They had their tables set up. There was really good music. I wanted to go hear the music, but all of these different activist groups. And I went around from table to table, talking to people, finding out what they were all about. And at the end of the day, I was suicidal because these were the most god-awful, miserable people. And, I say that with a grain of salt, but they really were just, everything was horrible. Everything was terrible. And I said to somebody, where's the joy? Where's the joy in what we do? And they said, oh, we don't have time for joy. The world's being destroyed. We just don't have time for joy. So, as people of faith, we have to take time for joy. And that's why Earth Day celebrations are really good, because we do have to take a moment and have the joy and also celebrate what we've accomplished, which helps us then go forward because we still have a lot more to accomplish.
Yeah, you just think, man, let's cheer on these successes as a means to compel us to greater successes, right? We can think about what's happening with plastics in the world right now. Like, man, we need a different relationship with polycarbonates. There needs to be we need to what do they say in relationships? We need to what's the phrase that they use about, we need to have a DTR, a define the relationship with plastics, because they've really become a problem, and garbage bags and all of that stuff, and twist ties and rubber bands, and there's still a lot of work.
I think it comes down to at least for me, but also for a number of other people, is we need to rethink our whole economic model that we're operating under. We're still operating, as much as we've accomplished with everything on pollution, we're still operating on the same economic model that we had 50 years ago. And that really is a model that says the value of a tree, for instance, is based only on the cost of cutting down the tree and the capital gain from cutting down the tree, whether that's selling the wood or clearing the land. And the tree has no other value other than that. That's it. And, we look at our environmental assets and services based on their market value. And so we really have to start rethinking that and building. And there's movements out there now in the Franciscan world and in other worlds around the whole idea of building an economy centered around the common good. It's something that Pope Francis talks about all the time. And that's an environmental movement when we're talking about the common good, because then the tree has a value outside of the cost of the wood and the cost of cutting it down. The tree has a value, an intrinsic value for what the homes it provides for squirrels and birds and other animals, for the shade, for what it does, for what its root system does for the entire ecosystem. And we start to think of things like that. And then that gets into the whole argument that St. Francis made some 800 or so years ago, just about the connectiveness to everything, how we're all interconnected. And, it's really fascinating today if you follow quantum physics, and I don't. I can talk about it real briefly, but
I was going to say, you're a more standard physics guy?
I read a lot of quantum physics. Real Newtonian. But in quantum physics, they've discovered now, this whole concept of quantum entanglements, and something that happens here can affect something across the globe, across the universe. And they're beginning to understand this now. So what we do to the environment here, whether it's in this country, can affect the globe. And we have certainly seen that this past year with COVID, how something that happens in one little part. And so we have to move beyond this idea of separation, that we're all separate. And, again, as our good friend Brian McLaren often says, do you think Jesus came with a building plan or an evacuation plan? Because we're operating under a theology that we're just here to go there. And everything we do here is only important, only insofar as it helps us to get there. This is very, St. Thomas Aquinas, this is his whole theology. I don't know how you all feel about Thomas Aquinas. We Catholics, he's like one of the top 3 theologians. And he said, helping creation, helping the birds, protecting creation is only valuable because it helps us get closer to God, not because of what value it has for creation. We have to move away from that theology if we're really
Yeah.
gonna come to, take care of our environment.
Yeah, and especially because religious people, there's so many in our country, and because we endeavor to be a we the people nation, where the opinions of the people are reflected in our elected officials, then are reflected in our laws, which then become sort of the standards that we all operate under. Then what the opinions of the people are really start to matter, and religious people, shockingly, are often the ones who are arguing against the kinds of practices that would be best for the planet and therefore best for all living things. Right. That part of the puzzle is so confusing. And we did an interview a while back here on the podcast with some people that made a documentary about the relationship between the environmental movement and religious people, and how big money and big efforts came in to move religious people away from supporting the environment. There was a period of time in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when it seemed like everyone in the country on all the sides of the political spectrums were going to be moving together to do something about global warming. Then Al Gore really took it on as his issue, right? And it became a fundraising and fighting point for the political and religious right. And they circled up and joined together. And evangelicals and Catholics were a big part of that. And so the idea, that you raised, that we have to deal with this, not just on a technology level, but on a psychological, ideological level, which is fueled by this religious identity that people hold. Yeah, it is so important. And there's like nothing more in common. It's the most in common thing you get, right? That
you can look at it, and people talk about Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is, came out 5 years ago. And lots of people talk about how wonderful that is, what great it is. I actually consider it one of the most important documents written in my lifetime, for a number of reasons. But what people don't really understand about that document is how much opposition there was to it. And again, and particularly in Catholic world and the Catholic right, how much money was spent trying to get cardinals to speak out against it. There was a whole move within the Vatican to stop Pope Francis from issuing that encyclical. I mean, there was cardinals and people that were just urging him not to issue this. It would be terrible. And even when it came out, and again, it's a beautiful document. In the United States, I would wager about half of the Catholics have never heard of it, maybe more. Probably, 60 to 65, 70% of parishes maybe mentioned it when it first came out and never mentioned it again. They would have mentioned abortion every week, but would not mention things like caring for creation or the environment at all. And that's, again, and part of that is because in Christian world, we have a theology of domination. And, we consider God created the earth to serve us, and we have domination over the earth. That's not what it says, but that's what we believe, or some of us believe. In fact, I remember back when Scott Pruitt was the head of the EPA under the Trump administration, and for some reason he took a liking to me and invited me to a one-on-one meeting with him, just he and I. One of his aides, I knew one of his aides, and we sat down for 2 hours and talked theology. And he talked about, and here's the guy that's the head of EPA at the time, and he talked about, it says in Genesis that we have domination over. He at least was willing to admit that we have to be good caretakers, but that we have domination, and all of these resources are there to be used for our benefit. That's not what it says in any of the stories in Bible at all, but that's what we say, and that's what people believe. And again, it comes to that whole theology of we're just here to go there. So wherever there is,
and a lack of a notion of the common good, right? If dominion doesn't mean domination, and dominion really should not mean domination, right? There are different words. Like if it means you're responsible for, or that you have a vested interest in its outcome in creation. But that's even that theology is a little I mean, this like phrase from the creation narrative in Genesis, which is what you're talking about. There's two
Yeah.
creation stories, and this is the second one where the Adam and Eve characters are told that they're to have dominion over and care for the earth. That's not really the primary narrative about how human beings are supposed to live on
No.
their planet. I mean, I guess you could try to argue that Jesus cursing that fig tree would be more the way the Trump administration approached.
Yeah.
Should have been
Yeah.
there should have been their proof text. They're going to make sure that all those trees suffer a bit. But this notion that somehow and there's two big arguments in the religious world. One of them is that domination narrative, which is so predominant, and then the other is, oh look, the planet is huge. The planet has been here for a really long time. Some of them would argue maybe up to 6,000 years or longer.
Wow.
That's for those only on the podcast. There was a wink in that one. It's been here for so long. Let's not say that human beings are going to ruin the planet. God's in control.
Yes.
God's going to make sure that the planet is okay. There's nothing we need to worry about. Stop thinking that human beings, have all this power over the planet, right? That's the one that has the most sort of juice in it these days. Are conservatives and religious people saying like, oh, those of you that are worried about a catastrophic climate problem, that's because you don't trust that God's going to make sure and care for all of us, which is also just violates the entire notion of living as people of morality, right? Jesus' teaching is that the human being is even more valuable than the bird, and God cares about and knows about the actions of the bird. But people still kill birds and people still kill each other. So that idea that you couldn't have any of this without there being some a human responsibility just simply doesn't make any sense. And I know how people go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it absolutely doesn't. And even if you go back to the first books in the Bible and in the Noahic covenant. Noahic covenant is with God, man, and creation. It's not God, man over creation. It's God, man, and creation. But we've lost sight of that. And again, in Franciscan world, and St. Francis taught us, it's about being in relationship with creation. And what is that relation? What is right relationship with creation? There's stories about St. Francis, and I'm sure some of it's mythology, some of it's true, and somewhere in between. But there's stories about him going out and preaching the gospel to the birds and to the trees. And people would ask him, why would you do that? Today he'd be locked up. But people then, they'd say to him, why are you going out and preaching the gospel to the birds and the trees? And he said, God told me to preach the gospel to my brothers and sisters, and these are my brothers and sisters. And that wasn't, that's not some hokey Dr. Doolittle talk to the animal story from Francis. That's what he believed. He believed that all relationship, all creation was his brother and sister. That's, his poem, the Canticle of Creation, is all about brother, sun, sister, moon. And, we're not the only religion. Christianity's not the only religion. If you look at Muslim teachings and you look at the poetry of Rumi, who is a contemporary, I don't think they knew each other, but they're around at the same time. And his poetry says the same stuff about brother, sun, sister, moon. And it's that relational to creation, which is why, again, we talk a lot about care for creation. And I've used that term a lot. I've stopped using that term, because that's a hierarchical term. That's a patriarchal term. That is, I have power over. And it really should be, are we in right relationship with creation, with all of God's creation?
Yeah.
And do we see, St. Clare, who, you guys probably won't get this, but I always tell this about St. Clare. She was the co-founder of the Franciscan order with St. Francis. But us being good Catholics, we gave all the credit to St. Francis, and Clare did all the work.
Yeah,
but
as you do.
She told us that we should see Christ in everything, every creature, everything, all of creation. We should see Christ, and every creation, part of creation, should see Christ in us. And if we're not doing that, then we're not living the message of Jesus.
Yeah, it has been the robust narrative of all the faiths. I mean, there hasn't been a faith narrative until the latter part of the 20th and now the 21st century where religious people would see themselves in opposition to the land, partly because so much of human existence, people felt that they were subjects of the land and of the weather and of nature. And as we've reached this modern age, which includes the notion that we can blow up the planet or destroy life on it. I mean, I don't know that anyone, even with nuclear weapons, are suggesting the planet would, be blown to pieces, but that you could destroy nearly every living thing in parts or the totality of the planet. That's changed our relationship with it. And so we live in a strange period of human consciousness where we're recognizing our ability to damage at a scale that is frightening. War, nuclear weapons, and so on would be part of that. And so would the slow processes that we're doing. When it comes to global warming and climate change and these important concepts, there's this big pushback. And if you're following this podcast and you have friends that will say to you, like, look, yeah, we should have dominion over the land, and humans are the top of the food chain, so us first, everything else second. Or if they say, we're not going to change what's going on the planet, like, sure, there's climate change, but we used to have an ice age, and now things are really hot. The continents used to all be one, and now they're split apart, from one another. So change and movement, that's normal. This is the argument, right? That, yeah, there's natural ebbs and flows to the earth, and that's what's happening. So yeah, there's climate change. We're seeing weather shifts, but let's not make that the responsibility of humans. It's not human influenced climate change. This is where the big argument is. Almost no one says there's not climate change. The argument is it human caused or not? So that has, for a lot of people, has felt like a really positive argument. I'll just say this about it. I heard a climatologist say, yeah, that's been true. And where we should be on the planet right now in the last 150 years, because there's noticeable, normal rhythms of change in the climate, we are in a cooling phase. The natural patterns mean that things should be cooling down right now, and instead they're getting hotter. So yes, there's natural flows, but it's even so much worse than you thought, because human influence has caused it not only to warm, but to warm beyond the, from the cooling phase to no change to a warming phase of catastrophic proportions. So that I found that to be very instructive for the people who say, yeah, there's just natural phases and that's what's going on. It's to remind them, yes, there are natural phases. We're in a cooling phase, and the fact that things are getting hotter shows even more the impact of human behavior, and especially the burning of fossil fuels and the influence of methane in the air.
Yeah, and the big difference between all those other phases is we didn't have the ability to destroy Earth during all those other phases. We have the ability today to destroy Earth. We never had that ability even 200 years ago or 500 years ago. We have that ability today where we can, and we're moving toward that the destruction of Earth, not, and you'll also then get people who say, they believe in the apocalypse, and they'll say, this is all part of God's plan. God's we're going to burn up. The earth is going to burn up, and then Jesus is going to come and make it all better. And you can believe that, but that's certainly not what it says in it.
Probably not a great idea. Yeah, that's right. Probably not a great idea to believe that.
Yeah, and act on it. I as you know, I have strong faith, strong person of belief, but I believe that Jesus came not to die on a cross so he could open up some gates somewhere so we can go into heaven because of some sin that was committed 5,998 years ago or something. But that Jesus, the incarnation, is about the continuation of creation. There's a theologian and activist, Dorothy Soleil, I think I'm pronouncing her name right, who's in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. She was from Germany. And she wrote a number of books. She was an activist and one of the leaders and founders of the whole liberation theology movement. And she wrote that she believes that God created an earth unfinished, and that we're here to complete the creation. And the incarnation was about completing the creation. And so, we have to move away from that theology of we're just all going to sit around and wait for Jesus to come again and wave his magic wand, and then things are going to get better. I mean, honestly, if I were Jesus and I were sitting in heaven and I looked at the mess we've made on Earth, I'd say, yeah, let me go find a new planet. I'll let those folks be on their own and go find somewhere else.
Yeah, and look, there's change that we can bring about on these things when we see the places where and the warming of the atmosphere. That's a really cataclysmic one. Like that, if you think people are just get a little hot and heavy about this, there's a reason that they do. It's more devastating to human and all other living creatures' existence than the other things that we've solved, than other kinds of pollution or other kinds of interventions that we've done. There's a reason that every component of global society is worried about this. One of the groups that's most worried about climate change and the impacts of the human influence on climate change is the military. Like the most conservative part of the American ecosystem is like, this is a real problem. We take it very seriously, and we know. So the human influence climate deniers, they exist and they play a role in our society, and we should listen to them to a degree, and then move on to what people know, and that is that human beings are causing these changes. And Patrick, I really feel like there are solutions to what's causing climate change, human-caused climate change. Methane, they're figuring this out. Animals actually create a whole lot of it, and you start putting a whole lot of cows out in the world, and some people sort of giggle at the fact that the methane that comes out of belching of cows really creates a problem, but it really does. And there's some great work being done to solve for that, because it's as much as you've advocated and others have advocated for the planet to turn to a diet that doesn't require cows that belch. It doesn't look like that's going to happen as fast as maybe sequestering that methane or finding algae that they will insert into the feed and the diet to reduce the amount of methane. Like they're literally figuring out how to solve belching of animals, because it has a lot to do with the warming of the planet. In addition to automobiles and all the rest.
It has as much to do with it as cars do. And, I'm a vegetarian, so I, try to urge people to become vegetarians. Although being a good Catholic, we tried to start a movement around eating meat, no meat on Fridays. It's in our DNA. And just if people would just give up meat 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And, again, as Catholics, we like to sell our indulgences a lot. So I told people I don't eat meat 7 days a week, so I'll sell you 4 of those days. It's like a carbon tax.
That's right.
But it is stuff like that we can do. We have the ability to reduce our meat consumption. You don't have to give up meat completely, but you can reduce the amount of meat at the same time while we're looking for ways to capture that methane gas. We can reduce our automobile use. I mean, you and I have been in Washington, D.C. when we've had to go 3 miles to get a meeting, and we've decided we're not going to call an Uber. We're going to walk to the meeting. Yeah. And it's healthier for us, and we're reducing our carbon footprint a little bit. And so if people just took the time to look at things like that, look at what their carbon footprint is, and really, whether you believe in climate change or not, it's just going to help the environment by reducing your carbon footprint. And that's something that Earth Day really pushes is how do you, right? If you go on their website, earthday.org, they have a whole thing where you can go in and check what your carbon footprint is and suggestions. And then groups like Green Faith and groups like that come out with how you can live the change every day. Because it's something that and I'm sure this has happened to you. I've given lots of talks around the country on this issue, and people at the end of the talk will say, that sounds really good. I have no influence over members of Congress. Sure, I can write a letter or send an email, but I'm not, I don't believe for a second that has any impact on them. What can I do as an individual person to bring about a change? And that, I think, is what Earth Day was started out as, to really talk about what can we, each of us, do in our own lives. How can we reduce our carbon footprint in our own lives, to reduce the amount of carbon and change the way we use energy. I mean, it's simple things like turning the lights off in your house can have an effect.
Yeah, you think about that everyone should do their part, right? So for some of us, we can say, well, I'm going to walk instead of ride, or I'm going to turn off the lights instead of leaving the lights on. That's what some of us can, or I'm going to eat this kind of diet rather than the other. But then there's other people that they have a company and they can make new kinds of light bulbs, like moving away from incandescent light bulbs to LED lights has reduced energy consumption by massive amounts, right? So if you have a company, you should do that. Or if you're somebody's thinking about going into engineering, how about going into engineering that's going to have great climate impact? Some people are in businesses and they'll decide what business they should be in relationship with. Some people set policy and they should be setting policy. All of us can influence a policymaker in some way, shape, or form. So we should do that. Like, what we need to do is be sure that every part of the system is actually doing their part, and not to separate out the innovations and structural legal changes, because look, without those, all the personal behaviors, they ain't going to work. Like we could all reduce what we're doing with our trash. And if you don't make it against the law for people that have massive amounts of garbage to not dump that, you're going to have a pollution problem. So we really need all of these things to happen. And the structural change, the people that can change it at a structural level, they keep saying, like, we need public will to allow this to have some legs. Like you and I've worked with lots of politicians and talked to people about many kinds of issues. And it's amazing how they will keep saying, well, what we really need is public voicing and public uprising. We think about what's happened in the last number of months around police violence. Well, the many killings that have happened by police that are in public spaces have allowed a lot of people to raise their voices. That's given strength to these movements at a political level. So I say all that to say, look, everyone do your part, and individuals, don't overplay your personal role, right? Don't believe that the only thing you have to do is, but also don't underplay that at all. It's as equal of a play as everything else, right? We have to do all of the things, and the real solutions are going to come from massive, massive technological changes. What's going to make massive technological changes is that there's a market that wants it, that cares about it, that says, no, we are going to buy electric car. I think about all the people that have purchased electric cars, and I think you're one of those. Are you an electric car guy?
I did. I don't know, but I did. Yes. Yeah.
We all knew that, they're not being, those people that bought electric cars, there weren't enough of us buying electric cars that was going to change it. There wasn't the point. The point was to show that there was a market, to keep the development of the electric car in play, so that people who are creating cars and batteries and transportation would start to pursue it. And then as that technology became more capable and people became more interested, the synergistic life between possibility and desire starts to create the point where now, I think it was General Motors that said by 2024, 2034, they're not going to produce gas-powered vehicles anymore.
All electric cars, In fact, they're opening up a plant in, I think it's GM, I'm not sure, in Ohio, that Trump promised to open up. He was going to reopen this plant, and it was going to be building regular cars, and it never reopened. And now it's reopening to build electric cars. And look at the solar and alternative energy, and it is important to understand that we can make a difference. It's it's not just about what I can do as an individual, but I think you were there. I'm not sure if you were there back when I think it was 2010. When they were starting to build the Keystone Pipeline, and we had that big demonstration in front of the White House where lots of us got arrested. I got arrested. I don't know if you were at that one or not.
I wasn't. But, no. But the Keystone Pipeline is right up the street from
Up but that demonstration, there were thousands of people who came to DC. It was a week long. It was one day. That was all faith leaders. There were about 300 of us that got arrested on that day. The whole week, and everybody said, it's a done deal. You're not going to change it. It's a done deal. This is fine, but you're wasting your time. It's a done deal. It's going to be signed, and it stopped. And even Trump tried to start it again, and now it's been stopped again. And so we can make a difference. We can make a difference in a lot of ways. One way is to take to the streets. One way is what you and I spent 3 months traveling around the country on the bus, trying to educate and raise awareness. One way is by our personal habits, what we do, but all of them together can work.
All of it together.
It's not just one thing. You know, in Franciscan world, we have a saying, and it's attributed to St. Francis. Somebody said that he said this on his deathbed, that I've done what's mine to do. Now it's your turn to do what's yours to do. So it's our turn, all of us, to do what's ours to do. And again, not everybody's called to go to Washington, D.C. or wherever and stand in front of the White House and get arrested. I fully understand that. I have a lot of friends who have said to me, oh, you know, you do that. I could never do that. And I'd say, okay, what can you do? What's yours?
Then what can you do? Yeah, because you got to think. You know, you think about this argument about what's God's job and what's our job. The fact that we all exist means that our parents co-created, right? They partnered. There was a moment of close intimacy that for most of us, other than those, you know, who are created by other means of injection, whether that's into a mother or into a test tube, but something two people participated, and then the birth of a human being, which people who want to say that every person is the blessed gift of God, any of us who say that and want to say that's, you know, that's God's work, it's God's miracle. Yeah, but your mom pushed, or the doctor made the incision, and all of that's because people participated in creating the very thing God wants. Like this idea that even somehow we're competing against God, humanity versus, like, let's not overstep and do what should be God. That's what people do all the time. That's how we literally how we've come to be born, is that people are co-creators and co-participants with God. And the same thing with the planet. Like, we shouldn't be wrestling between these ridiculous polar opposites. There would be no call in any of our teachings, and Jesus's teachings being, you know, preeminent. There wouldn't be any of these Jesus teachings for people of Christian faith if it didn't matter what you did. Right? Of course it matters what you do. So do all of the things and encourage all the elements to do their part. And getting good global citizens out of our businesses, that's incredibly important, and out of our technologies at every single level. Like, every part of our economic system, if it was asked to participate in affecting human impacts on climate change, that's what I see the Biden administration wanting to do. That's specifically what the Trump administration did not want to do. That's why they backed out of the Paris Climate Accord, which was signed, I think, 5 years ago today, maybe. I think it was on Earth Day that it was signed. So yeah, everyone has to do their part, and to encourage every other piece to do their part. We've had successes before. We'll have successes again, and let's.
We are a hopeful people. And so we have to be hopeful that we can be the change, but we actually have to do that, and we have to, you know, agree to that. And again, it gets to as Christians, you know, it's the whole belief system of Jesus came to die on the cross to save us from our sins. And so now we spend our time worshiping at the foot of the cross. And Jesus never once in any of the Gospels said to worship him. Jesus said to take up your cross and follow him and be him. Right. In fact, Jesus said, you can be greater than me. I tell people that sometime I'm going to go up to New York to St. Patrick's Cathedral when Cardinal Dolan is preaching. And at the end of his homily, I'm going to get up and I'm going to say, today I'm going to be greater than Jesus, and see what the impact, see what happens.
Well, I wrote a whole book called Outdoing Jesus that people could pick the hills of Jesus. And then I talk about the technological and personal matching and extending that, because as you say it, it's Jesus's entire agenda. Those who believe in me will do the works I'm doing and do even greater works than these.
Greater works.
Jesus is a starting line of humanity, not some sort of past finish line that we're all trying to admire. It's a different. I mean, Jesus would be appalled by people suggesting the kinds of things that so many of us talk about when it comes.
And again, it's the idea of, what Thomas Aquinas taught us. We're here just to go there. And everything we do here is good if it helps us get to there. It's not good. And I mean, this is a whole theology that helped bring about slavery and the doctrine of discovery and all of those other evils that came about, that it's all about just us going to heaven. There's this movie out a couple of years ago. It was a Ben Affleck movie, kind of a B-rated movie, didn't get a lot of play. I think it was called We Are the Night. And he plays a mobster from the 1920s, goes down to Tampa to start a rum running business down there. He befriends this woman who's a charismatic evangelical. And, they're on opposite ends, but they become friends, and they're sitting down to lunch one day, and they have this discussion. And he asked her about heaven. And what does she think of heaven? And she stops and she says, well, just imagine, maybe we're in heaven now, but we're screwing it all up. And
that's a great line.
I think about that. And for me, I just think that if I do everything I can here now to create heaven, then, what happens next is going to take care of itself.
Right.
It doesn't matter if I go to church and hold my hands the right way. It doesn't matter any of that. It matters that I really do work to build heaven here. And if we all come together and do that. Brian and I gave a talk together the other night for this organization, this group, Journey of the Soul. And at the end, they asked us to 1 minute, give your 1 minute wrap up. And so my 1 minute wrap up was, I asked everybody to imagine that God all of a sudden appeared to you and said, I decided I'm starting all over. Things are not so good. I want to create Earth again. What would it look like? What would you do to build the new Earth here? And just imagine, because we've lost that imagination. We're so focused on just going somewhere else. And people should sit down and imagine, if we're creating heaven here on Earth, what would it look like? Because it sure wouldn't look like the pollution that we're pouring out into it and the destruction that we're doing to the environment. And maybe if we imagine that and then start thinking about, okay, what are the steps necessary to get to that point? And that's when we can start to bring about the change.
Well, happy Earth Day, Patrick.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you today, my friend. Happy Earth Day to all y'all. And if you want to join us tomorrow, we talk science. And we have a person on who has started an entire organization that she leads on helping people get from the Earth to the moon and then on to Mars. So we talked about this a bit last week. I referenced her in the video that we showed. She's going to be our guest tomorrow, along with astrophysicist Paul Wallace. So we're going to be on Earth today and in low Earth orbit in our conversation tomorrow. Mondays, we talk about the news that goes on. Tuesdays, politics. Wednesdays, faith, all designed to help you find a pathway for the common good in all that you have going on. Tuesday night, I'll remind you that we have our final installment on a session called The Threat of Christian Nationalism, a Faithful Response. I'd love to have you join us. Kristen Dumais and Shane Claiborne will be our guests on that one. And then mark your calendars to engage in Common Good Immigration Call from September through November this fall. We're going to be asking you to hop on a bike and change our immigration and border policy practices. So all of that coming up. If you want to know more about all of this, we'd love for you to be over at Vote Common Good. Get on our email list. If you're looking right now, really right now, if you're watching this video, just type into your browser, votecommongood.com. Go over to the email, go over to that site, sign up for the email list. Don't miss the donate button when you're there, of course. And if you listen on the podcast, share this with a friend. Don't just keep it to yourself. Share it around with a friend. Tell them that you enjoy it, and maybe they will too. And we'd also love to see any things that we have going on. So thanks for being with us today. Sorry for our late start. We think we got our technology figured out, and we will see you for a Common Good Science Day tomorrow.